So, Tenuta Sette Cieli means a state of seven skies, and that is because of the position of the estate and the feeling you get once you're there. So, to give you a sense of place, we're located on top of the first ridge of hills that runs parallel to the Mediterranean Sea. So, we're at 350, 400 meters altitude, and we're on the top of these hills that roll down and then it's flat until the sea, and we get this incredible view of the Mediterranean and this sense that you're really on top of something, and with clear views in every direction.
Wow, wonderful. That just sounds stunning. Fascinating people with stories to share, fabulous wines and the best local foods to accompany them, and beautiful places to discover and visit. All of this and more on Wine, Food and Travel with me, Marc Millon, on the Italian Wine Podcast. Join me for a new episode every Tuesday. Welcome to Wine, Food and Travel with me, Marc Millon, on Italian Wine Podcast. Today we travel to Tuscany, to the prestigious wine zone of Bolgheri, and more precisely to Monteverdi Marittimo, between Bolgheri and Castagneto Carducci, to meet my guest Ambrogio Cremona Ratti of the Tenuta Sette Cieli wine estate. Buongiorno, Ambrogio. How are you today? And is it a beautiful day in Monteverdi?
Good morning, Mark. Yes, it is actually. It's a sunny day. Very happy about this, and everything is well here. Thank you.
Does that mean spring has already arrived?
Oh, yes, it's coming. It's been very rainy so far, but now we're getting a sudden transition into warmer days, and the sun is getting warmer and warmer, and we get these cool mornings and very warm days in the early afternoon. So it's
Okay.
nice spring feeling.
I guess that winter rain that you've had a wet winter has been good for you. That allows the vineyards to soak up that moisture in anticipation of the hotter summers we've been having.
Yes, absolutely. The idea, all these rains will have replenished all the water reservoirs, and so that's helpful and gave us a good camel hump to bring us through maybe drier season. Let's see. It's been a challenge because it didn't allow us to enter the vineyard much,
Okay, sure.
so it kept us a little bit still. So we're eager to get to work, but yes, it's been. Hopefully, we get a nice spring, not too wet now. You know, that it will allow us to proceed with working in the vineyard and
Okay.
set up everything well.
Yeah. Good. Well, I hope that good weather continues, and because I know this is a very busy time of year in anticipation of the vines coming back to life and the whole
Indeed.
cycle beginning. Ambrogio, we met recently when you introduced your wines, and I learned about you and Tenuta Sette Cieli, and I'm eager to share your story with our listeners who are located all around the world. I want to begin with a discussion about Bolgheri, which really has emerged as one of Italy's greatest wine zones in a relatively brief time. Over the last 5 decades, it's become the source of some of the most prestigious wines that are sought all around the world. But the area itself still remains mainly off the beaten track for many wine lovers who come to Italy, who come to Tuscany. Can you first of all tell us about the Bolgheri wine zone, and then also about where Tenuta Sette Cieli is located? What's the countryside like? Give our listeners a visual representation of where you are.
Oh, absolutely. So Bulgaria to me is a very special place. Actually, I've traveled before extensively around Tuscany, and in Bulgaria, it's a unique location because there's the both you get the sense of the Tuscan hills and the forest, and the contact with the sea, which to me is extremely precious. And also, it's a very pristine area in the sense that the area was extremely underdeveloped. There were just a few villages, and there wasn't much. So, first of all, enologically, the history of Bulgaria in wine terms is very recent. Wine used to be made there, but only white wine and table wine, nothing fancy. And the area used to be cultivated more for traditional agriculture, potatoes and stuff like that, in the lower part of Bulgaria. There were a few families that had a lot of land historically in the area, and they were all related to the Gherardesca family, which was the family who owned that chunk of Tuscany. And one of these families married into the Incisa family, and Mario Incisa della Rocchetta is the man that we have to thank for what we have today in Bulgaria with wine, because Mario Incisa della Rocchetta was an incredible figure and a visionary who was a wine lover, very knowledgeable and passionate about wine. He used to travel extensively to Bordeaux, And he found similarities between his estates in Bulgari, which were used primarily for hunting and vacationing, and the soil and the influence of the sea that you get in Bordeaux. So this brought him to start to experiment in his property as early as the 40s or late 40s and 50s, and start planting some Cabernets and Merlots. And he produced wine for his family for many years, in which he finessed his winemaking capabilities and also the agricultural approach. And he then started to release the wine very famously in the 70s. Sassicaia, which is his wine, won a blind tasting against the Bordeaux Premier Cruise in Paris. And that put Bulgari on the map all of a sudden. And people realized that there was potential to make great Bordeaux varietals on the coast of Tuscany. In Tuscany, had been dominated by Sangiovese until then. And Sangiovese doesn't really thrive in Bulgari. Everybody was shocked, and it jump-started an area which went from having no wineries, aside from Sassicaia, to having a few wineries in the 80s. The first who followed suit were Ornellaia, then Grattamacco, Michele Sata afterwards, and the Antinoris, obviously. And that boom in the 80s really made people realize that there was incredible potential in the area. Sassicaia became more and more famous throughout the years. And by the 90s, it was quite well recognized. And by then, that's roughly when I myself moved to Bulgaria in 1994. The Bulgaria was being formed, and more and more producers were moving to the area. If we jump to today we have around 60, 65 producers in the Bulgaria DOC. And so it's been a relatively quick expansion, but it's still a very small area. Geographically, when I travel around and I see other DOCs or wine regions, you get the sense that they're quite a bit bigger. Bulgaria in itself is around 1,300 hectares, so not a lot of wine is made there, but it's very appreciated now.
Ambrogio, just a question. Why do you think, Italy has across the whole country, there's so many wine areas, and almost anywhere has the potential to produce wine, does produce wine, and has always produced wine. I'm curious as to why this area that's now been discovered as one of the areas most vocated to producing great wine, why there was no wine here in the past. Is it to do with the nature of the terrain? I know you have your challenges of working the terrain, which we'll talk about, but it's curious to me that such a great wine zone has only been discovered in the last 50, 60 years.
Well, you have to consider that the area of Bulgari was relatively underdeveloped, in the sense that it was mostly forest, a few farmers here and there, and it wasn't a rich area to begin with. So people actually went by relatively simple lives until the 1800s, the end of the 1800s, and there wasn't so much space. People have obviously tried to plant vines just because to both to eat grapes and to make a little bit of wine, which was extremely common to make a little bit of wine for themselves. But also, from my experience, the land that is good for wine is not fertile land where you want to grow food. So, for instance, the land that we have at Sette Cieli, which is high on the hills, and it's an area that is fantastic for wine. But sometimes I wonder, how did people manage to live off that land for food, to grow wheat and vegetables? Because it's a very aggressive soil, in the sense it's a lot of clay, limestone, very rocky. So it's an area that didn't explode economically and wasn't extremely wealthy. And that, I think, kept everybody focused on getting by and more regular agriculture than on making wine. And it was also owned by big families. And if no one, yeah, they usually had estates also in other parts of Tuscany or Italy. So there wasn't the pressure to produce wine there. And there wasn't enough economy, enough wealth for people to just play around and experiment.
Okay, that's a really, really good overview and explanation. And I think it's important for our listeners to really understand how recent Bolgheri is. These some of the greatest wines in the world being produced in this small enclave on the Tuscan seaboard or above the Tuscan seaboard. Now, your own story then, Ambrogio, begins with your mother. Is that right? What was her dream, and why is the estate called Tenuta Sette Cieli?
So, Tenuta Sette Cieli means estate of seven skies, and that is because of the position of the estate and the feeling you get once you're there. So, to give you a sense of place, we're located on top of the first ridge of hills that runs parallel to the Mediterranean Sea. So, we're at 350, 400 meters altitude, and we're on the top of these hills that roll down, and then it's flat until the sea, and we get this incredible view of the Mediterranean and this sense that you're really on top of something and with clear views in every direction. So that means that if you look north, you see Castiglioncello di Bolgheri and the forest. If you look south, you see a glimpse of Elba Island and the coast that runs down towards San Vincenzo. While if you look east, you see the rolling hills going back inland. And if you look west, you see the plains and the sea. Because of this position, being so high up, it's very windy. The sky tends to be very clear. You get great visibility. And everywhere you look, you get this sky everywhere. The sense that you're overexposed. Because you're so high, your horizon feels a lot lower, and you get the sense of sky surrounding you.
Wow, wonderful. That just sounds stunning.
Yes, and the light is incredible with sunsets at night, the stars, the change of colors, the dawn, with the sun coming up from the hills behind. To me, it's a magical place. I traveled a lot, but I'm yet to find a place that beats the feeling that you get there with the sense of being exposed to the elements and the sky. You feel really like it gives you a good sense of perspective, I think. And Sette Cieli means seven skies, which is, of course, all these glimpses that you get from the top of the hill. And also in Italian, we use sono al settimo cielo. There's a way of saying like I'm at the seventh sky. And as a seventh and sky also can be meant as heavens, cieli. So
Okay.
the reference to the seven heavens. And in Italian, we say sono al settimo cielo. I'm at the seventh heaven to when
Okay.
you're most
Yes.
happy and realize.
Yes.
So and going back to our personal story, it's now a family story. As with everybody, my story begins with my mother. I was born in northern Italy, where my mother grew up and where my mother and my father are from. So my family, my mother's family, comes from the textile business. My grandfather was a very ingenious man who started off as an artist making drawings for paisleys that would then be printed on silk to go on scarves, foulards, and ties. He started off as a simple artist making the drawings that would then be printed, and from there he founded his own printing company and grew tremendously and was very prosperous in the 70s and 80s and 90s. And it was very strongly connected to the fashion world. It was one of the excellences producing silk prints in Italy, in northern Italy, in the area of Como, which also has been renowned for this for many years. And then my mother was part of this for a long, long time. And then after she separated with my father when I was around 5, after a while she felt that she wanted to do her own thing and move out of the cities and dedicate herself to her passion, which were horses. And Tuscany has a lot of space and a lot of people that work with horses. So we moved when I was 8, not to Bolgheri because we didn't have buy anything there yet, but to Capalbio in the southern Tuscany, where we lived while my mother was looking for a property on the coast of Tuscany. By 1994, she had found this, what is now Sette Cieli, which is an estate originally around 80 hectares in size, so quite big, on top of a hill in the middle of nowhere, surrounded by forest. And the property, when we purchased it, was completely abandoned. It was a house from the 1200s, fallen down. When we bought it, was just ruins. There was no roof, a few walls, and a lot of plants had taken over the place. And the road to go up the hill was dramatic conditions. And
Estrada Bianca, then.
yeah, no, it used to be when we bought the property, it used to be that now it's a Strada Bianca. When we bought the property, it used to be that if you couldn't go up with a normal car, you would break it.
Oh
So it was
my.
only
Wow.
jeeps, and it was and the
Okay.
road to go up from the Bolgarese, it's 5.5 kilometers long, so it's
Oh
quite
my
a long way
goodness. Yeah.
going up in the middle of the forest until then you pop up on top of the hills and you get this incredible view. So the area was just visited by hunters and some people, some militaries parachuted there just because there was no one around to train. So it was an extremely remote spot.
Amazing, Ambrogio. What a brave decision to,
Yeah, no, it was incredible.
and crazy as well if the house
Yeah.
was completely in
We
ruins.
had no water. We still have no water, no electricity. So at the beginning, when we first moved there, it took us many years to build, and it felt like being on a boat because we had power
Yeah.
generators, battery packs, and our own wells. So it was a completely independent situation. So very fascinating, quite a challenge.
And that was part of your childhood, seeing this whole
Yes,
project come to
absolutely.
fulfillment and realization. But Ambrogio, as your mother was creating this amazing place, she didn't have wine in mind at that point, did she?
So when we purchased the place, not at all. Then, right after we purchased the property, we moved to the town of Bolgheri, and for many years we lived in the town of Bolgheri, and then right next to the village, in a house called Bellaria, which used to be surrounded by olive groves, but now it's Ornellaia vineyards. And living there, we came to know everybody. There's very few people, so if you could just to give you a frame, an idea, Bolgheri had back then 125 people living there. So
Amazing.
extremely
Amazing.
small. I used to
Yeah.
go alone to the town as a kid, and there were like three or four kids in the whole town. It was a pretty special situation.
And this is this famous line of cypresses that are in the
Yes,
Carducci poem.
yes. Bolgheri goes from the Aurelia, the Viale dei Cipressi, which is really beautiful, goes from the Aurelia road to the town of Bolgheri. So
Okay.
a few words just because, as you know, I'm passionate about history, about the Aurelia. The Aurelia is this incredible thing, which is this road that goes from Rome all the way to Nice in France, which was commissioned and built by Marcus Aurelio. And it was one of the great infrastructures of the Roman Empire. And it's been a reference point in geography for a long, long time. The Aurelia runs parallel to the sea along all the coast. And there it's Bolgheri is just going up at the foothills.
Okay.
So,
Okay.
and when we were living there, we came to know some people we knew already, some people we came to know then. So we came to know Nicola Incisa, Ludovico Antinori, a lot of producers from the area. And we realized that the land that we bought, some of it had incredible potential for wine. It was so remote and so extreme, and also outside of the proper Bulgari area, because although it's a weird situation in which it's the province that's back on the hills has this little piece of land that protrudes towards the coast, and that is where we're actually at. So we're in a different actual province. Although if we have to go somewhere, we go through the area of Bulgaria. The roads are we're connected to the other side.
What
So
province are you in?
we're in province of Pisa, actually,
And
but
Bulgari
it's in
is
Livorno.
in Livorno. Okay. So right on the confine. Yeah.
Yeah, there's this weird protrusion of Pisa that is right where we are that extends closest to the sea.
Okay.
So administratively, it was a different zone, but the soil profile and the climate was very similar to some of the first vineyards of Sassicaia. And so, because they're just a few miles, just 1 or 2 miles north, and with a very similar soil profile. So,
This stony, very stony
yeah,
soil then. The
exactly. So you get
Sassi.
this, yes, you got it with this soil, which is very particular, a lot of clay, so it becomes very hard and crusty when it's dry, and then when it's wet, it becomes extremely slippery. And if you walk there after it's rained, you will have few pounds of mud stuck to your
Right.
shoes
Yes.
really
Yes.
quickly, and a lot of iron and mineral quartz. So it's a very calcareous as well. So it's a very particular type of soil, which is a disaster for regular agriculture because if you have to like grow your produce from it, it's quite rough. Even if you only take into account how rocky it is, it's a problem. But for vines, it's fantastic because you get this sense of stress, of pressure on the plant, which naturally guides the vine to producing fantastic concentration, great minerality because of the content of the soil. So there's a very interesting situation, which is just great for wine, in which you there's really a great imprint of the soil and the climate on the vines, which really helps, and it's what guides what we do at Sette Cieli.
Okay. Now, Ambrogio, as you were growing up and seeing this estate come to life and then hearing these conversations and realizing that you were in an area with the potential to produce great wine, did you at a young age know that your vocation would be taking over the estate and becoming a winemaker and a proprietor of a wine estate? Did you, from an early age, know that?
Absolutely not. I enjoyed it, and I was a very close spectator and participated in some of it, but no, I had no idea that this would become such a big part of my life.
When did you take over running the estate?
I took over in 2012.
Okay.
Personally, yes. So the story there was that after my mother envisioned this project, developed it, planted the vineyards, developed the first labels and worked on the concept and the product. And unfortunately, then my mother fell sick, and she passed back in 2006.
Oh, I'm sorry to hear that.
Before we actually sold any wine. Back then I was 20, so I was very young, and I contemplated very seriously of taking over the winery myself and going ahead with the project directly. But I have to say, with hindsight, wisely, after a few calculations and a few after reasoning, I took a step back personally back then because I was 20. As I was saying, our property is very remote. You got winters that are relatively long, and I would have been alone in the place where my mother had passed, doing something that is very hard because running a winery is a very, very, very tough job and
Sure.
with no competence. So I'm glad I didn't do it back then because I surely wasn't ready. So we kept it. It was managed by family estate, and I then took over, which did a good job with the vineyards, an okay job with the rest. Not really what I would have done. But in 2012, I then took over with an idea which was very simple. My concept was, I want to make the best possible wines from these vineyards, and then from there navigate the business of it. But the idea was to get the best, express the terroir and the vineyard, and once that was out, consider in the process learn if it's worth it as a business. So with that in mind, in 2013, I hired Elena Pozzolini, a winemaker.
Were the vineyards established by then, Ambrogio?
Yeah, so we part of them. Yes, we had 7 hectares back then. So we had, if you look at a picture of our vineyards on top of the hills, there's a road running between them. The mountainside, the east side had been all planted and realized, and these vineyards are incredible because we got all these dry walls that we built ourselves with all the rocks that we found in the soil of the vineyard. So
So
it's a
terracing, that must have been so much work to terrace the vineyards.
yes. I didn't realize extremely well, but in 2016 we expanded and we planted 3 more hectares up on top of the hill. And it took us the amount of time and effort it took us was incredible. I was in awe of what was done before me when I had to do it
Sure.
myself because
Yeah.
to plant 3 hectares, we had two huge excavators in the vineyards for 18 months just working on the rocks, the terraces, preparing the soil. We found rocks the size of minivans that we had
Wow.
to well, we had to bring up
Amazing.
special tools to break them
Yeah.
up, to then move them. So it's a very, very particular place, and you get this tremendous effort. As a man, as a human, building a drywall which with huge rocks is an interesting feeling because you get the sense that you're building something that will outlast you by a long, long time.
Yeah.
So you imagine, can kind of imagine 500 years people finding this wall under some bushes and wondering who built them. Who was the fool
That
that
absolutely.
that
Yeah.
had all this done?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
it was nice to go through all of it again and experience what was done before in a new way. And now,
Yes.
and by then, so we planted 3 more hectares in 2016, and then in 2018 we expanded, purchasing a property just below us on our same road that brings to our property to us, but inside the Bolgheri DOC, so that we could experiment in producing wine both inside and outside the Bolgheri DOC, and have a good base at the bottom of the hill. So it's been a great adventure, I have to say. And then and frankly, I started to do this because I had to, just because for a sense of responsibility and duty, and then it became a passion, as one can imagine. I mean,
Yes, I can imagine. Now, let's go straight into talking about two of your flagship wines, the wines I tasted, which I liked very much, both the Indaco and the Scipio. Quite extraordinary wines that really do reflect the terroir, the altitude of the soil. But also, let's begin with the grape varieties. Maybe the Indaco is a better place to start because you have the variety, an unusual variety of
yes.
grapes there.
Absolutely. So Indaco, first of all, was the wine that was conceived by my mother when she started the project. The first wines of the concept of the Ratti of Sette Cieli, the main one was Indaco, and the idea was for it to be a wine that really represented our vineyards and our terroir, and to be a fine wine, so a very tight selection of the finest grapes of each variety that was in the blend. And the blend is composed by 1/3 Merlot, 1/3 Cabernet Sauvignon, and 1/3 Malbec. Now, the Malbec is, of course, the odd man out in this group, especially in Tuscany. And that is because, frankly, I'm not 100% sure, in total honesty, why we planted Malbec. I knew we did it. I have some theories, but I never got around to asking my mother the direct question of why did we plant Malbec. But there are many reasons that make it interesting nonetheless. First of all, that it used to be part of a much bigger part, have a bigger role in Bordeaux before it was grafted and moved down to Cahors after it suffered so much up there. And secondly, the wine that we get is extremely interesting. So Malbec takes up a lot of energy in the vineyard because it's a lot of work to grow it properly in an environment such as the coast of Tuscany. So it's because people are not used to growing Malbec in drier climates, especially in Argentina, where it's really found its ground, and it's an area that is desertic with irrigation. So you don't get a lot of the challenge that you get in Italy. But also you get a very different expression. The Malbec we get opposite the Cieli between the altitude and the soil, and the position is very, very elegant. There's this interesting mix of width and finesse, which is very fascinating. You get this delicate nose, very floral aromas, and this still the width and the juiciness that you expect from a Malbec once it's in your mouth. So that has been it's something special that is quite unique and that we cherish. And with Indaco, I think it plays very well with the Cabernets and the Merlot, the Cabernet Sauvignon and the Merlot in the wine. Then it's a wine that is made by a very tight selection. We go through 3 rounds at harvest, after fermentation, and after 6 months of aging. And we just keep the best lots of each of these varieties. And keep in mind that from our high altitude vineyards, we have 4 varieties. We make maybe 25, 26 different lots. Because we get very granular with picking. We treat all the vineyards the same every year. So we give all the vineyards a chance, and then we go and we select, just going for the best, changeables, with not being afraid of changing every year and getting granular and making small batch fermentations in order to really appreciate the and getting the hues of the various parts of the vineyard. Sometimes one terrace, if you go seaside and mountainside, there's a slight difference in profile. Or on the same vineyard, we do a few picking, we do 2 rounds of picking to get the ripeness just right. So it's all about being very granular and driven, and this allows us to produce this wine, which is very representative of our
And
vineyards.
and you do the assemblage, then tasting the different vats and bringing the
Yes,
wine all together. Why I remember what struck me was the intensity, the concentration, but underlying it all, and also the Scipio was a real vibrancy, a vibrant acidity that gave the wine a certain backbone and
yes.
identity and structure. Would you say that's a feature of Sette Cieli?
Yes, so Seticelli, our features are driven by the terroir and the vineyard. My mission is to represent and express as best as possible the terroir, the vineyards that we have. And luckily for us, they have very strong character. And one of the strong characteristics we have is this incredible acidity, which is not due to us being particularly clever or able to do great stuff in the cellar, but just we have this vineyard, this site in which we get this special condition in which the acidity. So usually when harvest time comes, you're a little bit in a pickle between acidity falling with and ripeness growing. So you want your grapes to be ripe, but you want there to be some acidity to keep some structure, to give the wine some backbone. Aceticeli, because our theory is because of the calcareous soil and the clay and the rocks, we get our acidity levels go down before harvest a bit, and then they plateau very high at almost white wine levels. And then they don't drop until after ripeness, basically. So we really get to go for perfect ripeness without having to worry about the acidity. This puts us in a position in which we can really focus on getting what we think is the best aromas connected to the ripe of the grapes. We focus on the seed feels when we crunch it with our teeth, the pulp, the skin. We focus on that, and it's a very experiential experience. There's not much lab work done. We do a few analysis, but it's all about tasting in the vineyard and trying to envision what that grape will turn into. And the acidity is a non-issue in this process, which is an incredible luxury.
I particularly liked that balance of concentration and phenolic ripeness of the fruit coming through, but also this freshness
Yes.
that that acidity is giving.
And it's been important for us, especially with the weather getting warmer, because you naturally get a little bit higher alcohol in your wines, and you want the acidity and the tannin structure to balance it. Otherwise, if you lose balance, it's over. So acidity has been a huge help in these times.
Now, Ambrogio, we're running out of time a little bit, but let's have a brief word on Chipion, this beautiful Cabernet Franc, but also just one or two words on the name.
Yes, absolutely. So, starting off with the wine, the idea is Scipio is 100% Cabernet Franc, and it's a small selection, a small production of around 10,000 bottles per vintage when we make it. So, I'm making 100% Cabernet Franc is extremely tricky because it's a variety that's quite fickle. And if you don't get it right, I think the aromas go a little bit overboard, and the pyrazines can overburden the wine. Because of this acidity that we were talking about, you can go for a ripeness level that is, in my opinion, a little bit over what you usually found in Cabernet Franc, because the conditions allow us to push in that direction. To me, it's a great expression. Or there's a crunchiness, great notes of spices and leather and tobacco, and this crunchiness and this liveliness given by the acidity, which to me is very special. While going to the name of the wine, I am very passionate about history. I studied history also at university, and Scipio is the name of the Roman general Scipio Africanus, which was Publius Scipio was his actual name, and he was an incredible Roman general who defeated Hannibal in the Second and Third Punic Wars. And to me, this was an incredible moment in history. If you have to imagine back then, around 280 BC, the Mediterranean was ruled by the Romans and by the Carthaginians, which were the Phoenicians, which were based in Carthage, which is modern day Tunisia. And they were essentially two powers started fighting over Sicily. And then the Carthaginians sent an army into Italy through Spain with Hannibal, which was a very famous and great general who crossed over into Italy with an army with elephants, 26,000 men in his army, with the Numidian cavalry, which was one of the best cavalry of the time. So Hannibal was ravaging through Italy, beating the Roman left and right with very cunning techniques. He was a great military tactician, and Scipio witnessed this growing up, and then as he was more mature, he became a very valiant fighter and general. And he was the one who devised the techniques to beat Hannibal and the Phoenicians and go to war with them and win the Second and Third Punic Wars. And he famously spread salt over the land around Carthage in order for it never to grow. It was an epic conflict that lasted many years. We had armies crossing from Africa into Italy, and Scipio mounted an offensive going into northern Africa from Sicily with an army. So he was an incredible figure, also very charismatic, one of the first generals in Roman time that gathered a lot of public support and became very famous and lived actually a pretty long life.
Fascinating, fascinating story. And I love that link with ancient history and the relevance to today as well. Were there battles along the Aurelia as well in your area?
Luckily not, because the main battles that were fought in Italy were the Battle of Cannes, which is actually in Puglia, which was
Okay.
famously one of the battles which I think something around 15,000 Romans died in 1.5 hours. It
Oh
was a
my goodness.
massacre, and it was one of the historic toughest defeat of the Romans. And luckily, what happened is that the Romans tried to stop Hannibal and his army that were going through Italy by indulging them, by making them comfortable where they were so the army would rest. And famously, they stopped in Capua for a long time. And it is said that the Romans sent them food and wine so that the army would just relax and not go on ravaging through Italy. So,
Yeah, because it was curious. Hannibal was camped not far from Rome and
yes,
never attacked Rome.
yeah, there was a circumstance in which he could have, and that would have been a pivotal moment in history, and he actually didn't. And that left an opening for the Romans to regroup and to then actually what Scipio did was convince the Senate to send him to Africa to fight on their land so that they had to bring the army back. Because what happened with Hannibal is he went through Italy, winning every battle. And Scipio, instead of attacking him in Italy, he had the Roman Senate send him to Africa with actually a very small and depleted army, which he replenished and trained. And then Scipio attacked Carthage and was getting closer, and they had to recall Hannibal back to Africa with his army. And then they faced in the famous Battle of Zama, in which Scipio ended up winning, but it was a very interesting tactical battle in which both armies were trying to encircle each other to then crush one another in the middle. And Scipio actually was able to win the battle thanks to partly to his political skills in recruiting some of the Numidian cavalry that had helped with Massinissa, which was a very relevant figure in northern Africa. And thanks to that, he was able to beat Hannibal in that battle. And famously, Hannibal and Scipio met many, many years afterwards in Syria. where Animal was at the court of a king and Scipio was traveling, and they talked about it. And Scipio asked Hannibal who the three greatest general were, and Hannibal said, "Well, Alexander the Great and myself," he said.
Uh-huh.
and
Wow.
and she asked him, What if you would have beat me at Zama? Then I would have been the greatest." That was Hannibal's reply. So very, very interesting story. And
Yeah.
actually, what also found fascinating with the Scipio, his his figure in Roman time was pivotal, although not directly, but his life allowed for later emperors to exist because Augustus and Caesar both had similarities with both were both incredible military figures, very cunning, great tactics, who then struck a chord in the heart of the people that got them all the power that they had and made the Roman Empire what it was.
Well, I'd like to think that when Hannibal met Scipio, they shared a glass of wine together. I know the
Yes, absolutely.
Carthaginians were very partial to the wines they found on the Italian peninsula, wherever they were, I think in Abruzzo and Puglia as well. Let's turn to another subject, Ambrogio. I would go on talking about history for ages. I'm
Yes.
fascinated by that story. But let's turn to your wines and gastronomy. Now, your wines are made from what we call international grape varieties, even though some have been in Italy for some centuries now. But Bulgari is mainly we consider an area where international grape varieties are planted. But what about the cuisine of your area in relating to wines or as well? I know you travel taking your wines around the world, selling your wines around the world, and dining in different cuisines. Would you say there's some foods or cuisines or local dishes to Bulgari, to your area, that are really well suited to your wines?
If we're talking about India con Scipio, I think that Tuscany has some great dishes that complement the wines very well. But I also think that internationally, in general, they play very well with highly structured courses. And because they're both wines with very high acidity, there's this palate cleansing feeling and crispiness, which goes really well with proteins and meats. In Tuscany, there's tagliata and a lot of wild boar, which is very present. And I would
From those
say
woods, the forests
yeah,
all around you.
yes, we are on the first. It's full of wild boar, deer, and I think the wines play really well with that. But also with more traveling around, I would say also with more modern and complex dishes. They do like to be paired with something with a little bit of structure because they're quite big wines. But for instance, Scipio in itself is something that sometimes I enjoy also as a almost meditation wine because the acidity keeps them so fresh. They're a little bit also wound up in the bottle. I found them that they feel like a loaded spring a little bit, and when you open them, you get this great evolution of the bottle of wine within the next hours while drinking it in the glass. So the experience to me of going through a bottle of wine and having it evolve as you go along with your meal is always a fantastic adventure.
Yeah, I think that's a fascinating and important point that wines, great wines, will evolve in the glass. And sometimes it's better to let that happen rather than to say decant and try to make a wine in its ideal moment because, as you say, it's changing almost minute by minute. And the problem I find is often the bottle's finished, but just as it's getting really, you feel it's getting
that that
really,
is a known issue, actually. Yes.
yeah, yeah. Now, Ambrogio, final question. You described this 5 kilometer long, what was a track, a rough track, and is now a Strada Bianca, an unpaved road. Can our listeners, who are, as I say, located all around the world, can they visit Sette Cieli? Can they discover the estate and visit? And do you offer wine hospitality, tastings, and the like?
Yes, so we're relatively private, but we do offer tastings for our clients. And I would be very glad to host both you and your listeners if they get in touch. It's a small estate, so we have a few people, myself, Elena, winemaker, and we have Natalia who follows sales who helps us, and we do tastings. We do tastings, but it's a very intimate affair because we do tastings at our own place, which is actually the house where I live when I'm here. So it's particularly private. It's like welcoming friends into your home more than a business meeting, usually. But yes, we do. Also, because for us, all the work we do is trying to convey a sense of place in a bottle, and so having it's a when people can come, it's a pleasure to share the actual place with them.
Well, I think that's the finest and the most exciting way to experience wine is to really enjoy it in place. And as you say, within that intimate family setting in the estate where it's made. I certainly would like to travel up that Strada Bianca and find you and enjoy the Sette Cieli, these magnificent views in all directions, looking down to the Mediterranean Sea and also up to the mountains. Ambrogio, it's been a real pleasure meeting you here today. And I really want to thank you for taking some time to be our guest. It's been a real pleasure.
Thank you, Mark. It's been a pleasure to have this conversation with you, and I hope to see you soon up on top of the hill.
Yes, I would love that. I will try to find a way to make that happen. Thank you, Ambrogio. Grazie. Buona
Thank you.
giornata.
Bye bye.
We hope today's episode of Wine, Food and Travel with me, Marc Millon, on the Italian Wine Podcast has transported you to somewhere special. Please remember to like, share, and subscribe wherever you get your pods. Likewise, you can visit us at italianwinepodcast.com. Until next time, chin chin.